In the stark aftermath of World War II, a German woman, accustomed to the privations of her war-torn homeland, marries an American soldier and moves to the United States. She is utterly disoriented and profoundly moved by the abundance, freedom, and comfort of her new American home, grappling with the profound cultural shock and the challenge of building a new life amidst such stark contrasts. It was the brutal winter of 1948 in a small German town. The air was a biting, unforgiving cold that seeped into the very bones, a constant, insidious companion since the war had stripped away so much warmth, so much comfort, leaving behind only the stark skeletal remains of once familiar structures and lives. Helga sat hunched by the flickering, defiant glow of a single candle, its small flame a fragile defiance against the encroaching darkness and cold that pressed in from every cracked pane of glass. Her breath misted in the frigid air of the small, drafty room, each exhalation a visible testament to the chill. Her fingers, chapped and reddened from endless chores, washing in icy water, scrubbing floors, foraging for fuel, moved with a practiced, almost rhythmic precision, meticulously mending a thin, threadbare sock. The wool was coarse against her skin, patched and repatched countless times, each careful stitch a silent prayer, a quiet, stubborn act of endurance. The worn fabric had been darned so many times it was more patch than original material, a tapestry of necessity. The silence of the night was profound, an almost sacred hush, broken only by the mournful, distant whistle of a train, a stark metallic sigh that spoke of slow repairs on shattered tracks, of dwindling resources, and of the lingering ghost of a world that once was, now irrevocably lost to history. Helga's movements were economical, each pull of the needle deliberate, every resource, even this salvaged, respun thread, precious beyond measure. She would not waste a single strand. Waste was a luxury, a sin she could not afford. The habit of meticulous conservation was etched deep into her very being. She had survived the war, had weathered the unceasing bombings that shook the foundations of the earth, the gnawing, pervasive hunger that hollowed out the stomach and the soul, the constant, ever-present fear that lurked in every shadow, every sudden noise. She had learned to anticipate scarcity, to celebrate even the smallest morsel. But nothing, absolutely nothing, not the vivid terror of a strafing run nor the quiet desperation of a child's empty stomach, could have adequately prepared her for the sheer, bewildering, almost violent abundance that awaited her across the vast, churning ocean. It was an abundance that would not only challenge but completely upend every single one of her deeply ingrained assumptions about scarcity, about survival, about the very meaning of a life lived. She was stepping into a world she could not have conceived of, a world that would demand a total renegotiation of her internal landscape. Imagine, for a moment, leaving everything you knew, your language, your memories, your very understanding of human existence, behind for a world beyond your wildest dreams. Where would you even begin to pick up the pieces, to reconstruct a sense of self, when the world itself seemed to be made of endless beginnings and limitless possibility, a concept so foreign it was terrifying? Helga's world, for as long as she could consciously remember, had been unequivocally defined by a constant, unyielding state of privation. Every single morsel of food was a hard-won victory against starvation. Every meager piece of fabric carefully mended and reused until it could literally be used no more. Every fleeting moment of warmth, be it from a shared blanket or a meager fire, was a precious, ephemeral gift snatched from the jaws of the bitter, ever-present cold. Her internal doctrine, honed and sharpened by years of relentless hardship, was one of extreme, almost obsessive frugality. It was a meticulous, almost ritualistic accounting of every single item in her possession, a constant mental inventory of what she had, what she needed, and what could be salvaged or traded. Waste was not merely frowned upon, it was an anathema, a dangerous, irresponsible indulgence that flirted dangerously with the precipice of ruin, of collapse, of death. The very idea of ease, of comfort unearned, felt intrinsically dangerous, a soft and insidious gateway to a weakness she had long ago learned to shun, to distrust. It was a luxury the war had taught her to be wary of, for it could vanish in an instant, leaving one unprepared. Her thoughts were a constant, quiet, almost subliminal hum of what if. What if the meager supplies ran out unexpectedly? What if the bone-chilling cold returned with renewed, merciless vengeance? What if something precious, something indispensable broke, and there was absolutely no way, no possible means to replace it? This wasn't a form of pessimism, not exactly. It was a deeply ingrained, almost pathological vigilance, a survival mechanism honed to a razor's edge by years of brutal necessity. It was her protection, her constant companion. The sensory landscape of her life for years had been one of stark, unforgiving realities. The persistent, earthy smell of damp, cold soil, the ephemeral, comforting scent of wood smoke drifting from the chimneys of neighboring, struggling homes, and the faint, almost imperceptible, yet ever-present, lingering smell of ash that seemed to be woven into the very fabric of the air itself, a permanent ghostly reminder of destruction, of loss. Sounds were sparse, muted, stripped down to their bare essentials. The rhythmic crunch of footsteps on frozen ground, the functional metallic clatter of tools being used for repair, the distant industrial drone of a factory somewhere on the distant edge of town, a whisper of struggling recovery, a hint of life, but not of abundance. The tastes were as meager and unforgiving as the rations themselves. Bland, starchy potatoes, thin, watery soups, the bitter, acrid ersatz coffee that did little to warm the belly but offered a faint, fleeting illusion of normalcy, of ritual. And underlying it all, always like a sour aftertaste, was the sharp, metallic taste of fear, a phantom taste that never quite left her tongue, a constant reminder of the ever-present danger. Her sense of touch registered only coarse, patched fabrics, the unyielding, biting coldness of stone walls that offered little insulation, the rough, salvaged textures of makeshift repairs, and the constant piercing chill that was less a fleeting sensation and more a permanent state of being, an unwelcome guest that took up residence deep within her bones. This was the world she carried within her, a world that molded her every perception, every expectation, every flicker of hope and fear. The journey itself was a blur, a disorienting kaleidoscope of exhaustion and apprehension. Days bled into nights. The rhythmic, incessant clatter of the train wheels across a foreign, unseen landscape became a constant, monotonous lullaby of displacement, of movement without direction. And then, abruptly, almost violently, she was there. Helga stepped off the train, her single worn valise clutched tightly in her hand, her knuckles white, the new unfamiliar pavement surprisingly smooth and even beneath her thin, sensible shoes, a subtle luxury she barely registered in her days. Her husband, Robert, a beacon of American optimism, his uniform crisp, his smile wide and reassuring, was there. He was the very reason for this seismic, bewildering shift in her existence, yet somehow, to Helga, his joy seemed almost painfully bright, almost too innocent. He led her, not to some grand impersonal hotel, but directly to his family's home, a sturdy, unremarkable house nestled comfortably in a quiet, tree-lined street, its windows glowing with an almost aggressive warmth. The air here was different, cleaner perhaps, or simply devoid of the familiar, haunting scent of wood smoke and ash, replaced by something sweeter, something alien. The first true shock beat, the initial seismic crack in her carefully constructed world of expectation, came the moment she walked into the kitchen. It was not the spare, utilitarian space she had known for so long, a place of grim necessity and careful, almost religious rationing, where every surface was clean but bare. This room was a cathedral of plenty, an overwhelming, vibrant explosion of color and scent. It was brightly lit, almost blindingly so, with electric lights that burned with an intensity she was unaccustomed to, making her eyes water slightly. It was a vast, spacious area, far larger than any room she had ever cooked in, filled with gleaming, unfamiliar appliances that hummed with a quiet, powerful energy, a low thrum that was almost alive. Her eyes, accustomed to ruthlessly seeking out scarcity, to identifying every potential lack, were assaulted by an overwhelming array of food. A towering refrigerator, a fortress of white enamel, stood sentinel in one corner, its door presumably hiding unimaginable riches, a concept almost too fantastical to grasp. A gas stove, enormous and multi-burner, promised endless heat, effortless cooking. Counters, wider and deeper than any she had ever seen, fashioned from some polished alien material, were laden, absolutely laden, with unfamiliar packages, each box and bag brightly colored, inviting, promising untold delights. Vibrant, fresh produce, unblemished and perfect, spilled in profusion from a woven basket. Reds, greens, yellows that seemed to leap out at her. And the smells, the powerful, intoxicating scent of brewing coffee, real coffee, mingled with the comforting, rich aroma of something baking, something sweet and rich that spoke not of survival, but of leisure, of indulgence. Helga froze, her hand still resting lightly on the door frame, as if needing physical anchoring to this bewildering reality. Her senses, long accustomed to deprivation, to a muted palette of sight and smell, were utterly overwhelmed. The vibrant reds of apples, the startling yellow of lemons, the deep, fresh green of lettuce. She hadn't seen such unblemished, perfect produce in years, certainly not in such casual, unthinking abundance. The sheer volume of packaged goods, each box and bag a mystery of unfamiliar brand names and promises, was staggering, a dizzying blur. A wave of dizziness washed over her, a physical sensation akin to vertigo. It felt almost sinful, an arrogant, almost defiant affront to the world she had just left behind, a world where such things were distant dreams, whispered fantasies, not daily realities casually displayed. A rising panic began to stir within her, a primal, instinctive urge to hoard, to gather it all up, to hide this unimaginable bounty before it vanished, before it was snatched away, as all good things eventually did. Her gaze, wide and almost fearful, landed on a loaf of pristine, perfectly white bread, sliced with mechanical precision and wrapped in a transparent, crinkling film. In Germany, a loaf like that, if one could even be found, if such perfect whiteness even existed, would be a week's ration for a small family, carefully sliced, toasted, and savored, crumb by precious crumb. Here, 3 identical loaves rested casually on the counter, next to a jar of bright red jam and a tub of golden, glistening butter. 3 loaves, she thought, her mind reeling. All at once? This is madness. Do they not know? Her mind screamed, a silent internal shriek. Do they not know what this means, what this represents, what this tempts? It was too much. The sheer, unthinking extravagance of it all was almost unbearable, a physical weight pressing down on her. The first escalation loop began with the revelation of the appliances and the bewildering, almost blasphemous concept of waste. Helga, still reeling from the kitchen's initial assault, from its overwhelming sensory information, soon discovered the washing machine. Instead of the back-breaking, skin-chafing, hand-numbing labor of scrubbing clothes in icy water, wringing them out until her wrists ached, and hanging them to dry in the damp, freezing air, here, clothes were simply tumbled clean. Push of a single button, a soft whirring sound, a gentle agitation, and then, miraculously, clean linen emerged, spun almost dry. It was a witchcraft of comfort, a betrayal of all the arduous physical lessons her body had learned, all the muscle memory she had acquired. Then there was the electric mixer, a humming marvel that rendered the strenuous, laborious task of whisking into a thoughtless action, a simple flick of a switch. And the toaster, which transformed a simple slice of bread into a golden brown crisp in mere seconds, a quick, effortless alchemy. These were not mere tools. They were alien extensions of a world she could barely comprehend, devices that eliminated effort, that defied the natural order of hard-won sustenance. She watched, bewildered, a knot forming in her stomach as Robert's mother Eleanor left the water running freely for what seemed like an eternity while washing dishes, the clear, warm liquid gushing down the drain with an almost reckless abandon, as if it were an endless, infinitely renewable resource, something never to be conserved. But the truly horrifying revelation, the one that made her gasp inwardly, came with the garbage disposal. Food scraps, potato peels, carrot tops, leftover crusts, bits of meat, were not carefully saved for compost or for animal feed, or even for the desperate. They were simply fed into a gaping, dark maw in the sink, swallowed by a grinding, guttural noise that vibrated through the floorboards. It was a concept so foreign, so utterly repulsive in its sheer disregard for sustenance, for the very essence of life, that it made her stomach churn, a bitter acid rising in her throat. Her internal monologue screamed, a silent, furious protest. They just throw it away, all of it, so casually? My mother, God rest her soul, who lived through the hunger of 2 wars, would weep at such a sight. She would be physically ill. This single handful of scraps could have kept a family from starvation for days. How can they bear such casual destruction, such a thoughtless obliteration of food? How can they look at such waste and not feel the crushing, suffocating weight of guilt, the ghosts of the hungry staring back at them? Her jaw would clench, a silent, internal battle raging between her ingrained habits and this new, perplexing reality. Soon she found herself silently, almost furtively, collecting discarded food scraps from plates when no one was looking, carefully smoothing out crumpled aluminum foil, painstakingly rinsing plastic containers before they were tossed into the garbage, a word that still felt like a profanity. She did this much to the growing bewilderment and slight discomfort of Eleanor. Eleanor, ever polite, ever trying to be kind, would offer a soft, confused smile, her brow furrowed. "Oh, Helga, you really don't need to bother with that, dear. We have plenty more of everything, you know, there's no need to hoard." But to Helga, it was not about plenty more. It was about the principle, the deeply ingrained habit of conserving, of respecting every last bit, of honoring the scarcity that had defined her life. It was a matter of dignity. The second loop unfurled with a grand, disorienting trip to a department store, an experience that bordered on the surreal, a dizzying plunge into an ocean of material goods. Helga had known marketplaces, bustling with the clamor of haggling, the careful, measured exchange of precious, hard-to-find goods. But this was something else entirely. This was a spectacle. Aisles stretched seemingly to infinity, glowing under artificial lights, laden with dresses of every conceivable color, fabric, and style, shimmering silks and sturdy wools. Shoes gleaming under spotlights promised effortless elegance. Hats, adorned with impossible feathers and ribbons, sat perched on mannequin heads. Cosmetics, in glass jars and elegant tubes, promised transformations, youth, beauty. There were endless choices, none rationed, all new, pristine, and terrifyingly accessible. The sheer variety of candy, piled high in dazzling, colorful displays. The seemingly infinite rows of toys, each one more fanciful than the last, and the bewildering assortment of household goods, from shimmering glassware to sturdy kitchen utensils, created a dizzying, overwhelming spectacle. The casualness with which people browsed, picked up items, weighed them in their hands, and purchased them without a second thought, without a flicker of fear or guilt, was astounding, almost insulting. She watched, mesmerized and a little horrified, as a woman, impeccably dressed, bought not 1 but 3 identical dresses, simply in different colors, as if they were disposable items. The sales assistant, with an air of practiced nonchalance, mentioned a 30-day return policy, a concept so utterly alien, so utterly absurd, that it felt like a cruel joke. Why would one return something so precious, something so new and unworn, something that could be used or even traded? Eleanor, trying to make small talk, to share the joy of consumerism, casually remarked, "Oh, I just needed a new frock for the bridge club. This one really caught my eye." Helga's mind immediately conjured a stark, poignant image of her own single best dress, carefully preserved for years, mended and cared for with the utmost reverence, worn only on special, momentous occasions. The contrast was a physical ache, a sharp pang in her chest. Her reaction was one of profound, almost dizzying dislocation. She struggled even to comprehend the idea of making such trivial choices, of weighing one frivolous item against another, let alone making them amidst such overwhelming, unthinking plenty. Each item, each choice, each shimmering display seemed to scream of a world where scarcity was merely an abstract concept, a sad story from a distant land, not a lived, brutal reality. She felt a profound, almost corrosive guilt at the very notion of indulging in such frivolity, at the mere thought of even desiring something so unnecessary. She noticed the subtle social cues, the easy laughter, the light-hearted, almost superficial quality of the conversations, all of it a stark, unsettling contrast to the grim, serious undertones of her recent life, where every word carried weight, every gesture held meaning. It was as if she had stepped onto a brightly lit stage where everyone knew the lines, understood the unspoken rules, and followed the choreography. But she, Helga, stood alone, lost and confused, unable to even grasp the basic premise of the play. The third escalation loop deepened her sense of estrangement, focusing intently on the unquestioning comfort and almost terrifying ease of the American home itself. Robert's family home was not just a house, it was a fortress of ease, a bastion of effortless living. Central heating hummed softly, a constant pervasive drone, keeping every room warm, evenly heated, regardless of the biting wind or falling snow outside. There was no huddling by a single inefficient stove, no cold spots, no careful anxious rationing of precious fuel, no constant worry over the next delivery of coal. A bathroom, gleaming with polished porcelain and chrome, offered constant unlimited hot water, a luxury Helga hadn't known since before the war, something she still treated with a quiet reverence, taking quick, efficient showers despite Eleanor's bewildered offers to draw a nice, long, hot bath for her. She found it impossible to luxuriate, to simply let the hot water run when she knew the effort it took to heat a single bucket. Plush furniture, sink into its sofas covered in velvet, and soft, thick carpets covered every floor, absorbing sound, cushioning every step, and adding to the overwhelming sense of effortless, unearned comfort. The entire house felt soft, yielding, inviting, a stark contrast to the hard, unyielding, resilient surfaces of her past. The rough wood, the cold stone, the bare earth. And then there was the garage, a separate structure that housed not just one, but two gleaming cars, each a testament to mobility, to leisure, to an almost unbelievable freedom of movement. Robert, in a moment of casual conversation about their future, about the summer plans, mentioned their annual vacation to the seaside, a concept that felt like an impossibly extravagant fantasy to Helga, a dream so far removed from her reality that it seemed cruel to even utter it. She hadn't known leisure, true, unburdened leisure, in over a decade. Every moment had been accounted for, every effort directed towards survival. Eleanor, noticing Helga's quiet contemplation of a new armchair, her gaze distant, perhaps trying to bridge the ever-widening gap, asked kindly, her voice laced with genuine concern, "Isn't it wonderful, dear, to just relax after everything? To finally have some peace? Some quiet?" Helga, inside, felt a jolt of alarm, a cold spike of fear. "Relax," she thought, the word almost screaming in her head, echoing with a hollow sound. Relax? With so much to be done, so much to protect, so much that could be lost at any moment? How can one simply relax when the world is so fragile, so uncertain, when the foundations of life can shatter in an instant? Her vigilance was a part of her, an essential organ. Helga felt a growing, aching chasm open between herself and her new family. Their comfort seemed utterly effortless, almost innocent, as if they were completely unaware of the inherent fragility of such things, of how quickly it could all be taken away. They lived as though the abundance was eternal, a given right, something never to be questioned or feared. She watched Robert, her husband, adapting so seamlessly, so easily, so effortlessly, to this world he had returned to, a world that was systematically tearing her own perceptions, her very understanding of reality, asunder. His innocent enjoyment, his seemingly boundless optimism, his unquestioning acceptance of this easy life, all added another crushing layer of quiet resentment and a profound, gnawing loneliness to her already heavy, burdened heart. They were living in two different worlds, and the physical proximity only highlighted the vast, emotional distance. The midpoint twist came subtly, not with an explosion of revelation, but with a quiet, devastating implosion of understanding that shook Helga to her core. It happened during a family dinner, a warm, boisterous affair filled with the comforting sounds of laughter and easy conversation, punctuated by the clinking of silverware. Helga, sensing an opportunity, a moment of connection, decided to attempt to bridge the divide. She began to share a story, speaking softly, carefully, about a particularly lean winter in Germany, the one before Robert had arrived. She described the ingenuity required to make a single, withered potato last for days, carefully peeled, meticulously stretched into thin slices. She spoke of the shared warmth of neighbors huddled together for survival against the bitter cold, of the grim camaraderie forged in the face of despair. She recounted the sheer, visceral hunger, a constant, gnawing emptiness that never truly left, even after a meal. She spoke with a quiet intensity, choosing her words carefully, expecting a flicker of recognition, a sign of empathy, an understanding of the immense, formative, brutal experiences that had shaped her, that had made her who she was. Instead, the family, uncomfortable with the raw, grim realities she presented, shifted uneasily in their seats. A strained, awkward silence descended upon the table, heavy and palpable, quickly broken by a flurry of well-meaning but ultimately hollow platitudes about the good old USA, about how we're all so lucky now that the war is over, and about the latest new purchase Eleanor had made for the house or the latest juicy local gossip. They spoke of progress, of moving forward, of forgetting the unpleasantness, of putting the past behind them. It was a swift, gentle but utterly devastating deflection, a polite turning away from a truth they did not wish to confront. In that excruciating moment, Helga's assumption that her experiences, her sheer act of survival, granted her some form of moral authority, or at least an immediate, visceral understanding from others, shattered into 1,000 tiny, stinging pieces. She realized with a chilling, heartbreaking clarity that her suffering was not easily digestible, not a tale to be absorbed and empathized with in the comfort of a warm dining room, nor was it necessarily valued or even truly understood by those who hadn't lived it. Her past, the very crucible that had forged her into the woman she was, the source of her profound strength and resilience, was not a badge of honor here. Instead, it was a burden, a heavy, unspoken weight that alienated her, that marked her as different, that made her an outsider even within the supposed warmth and embrace of her new family. They saw a German war bride. She was a survivor, a ghost of her own history. The twist was not an external event, not a dramatic revelation from outside, but a profound internal realization that altered Helga's very perception of her new reality. Helga understood with a clarity that was both painful and illuminating that her finely honed survival skills, the hard-won lessons of scarcity and deprivation, while absolutely essential for her past existence, were now not only irrelevant, but actively alienating in her present. Her ingrained sense of caution, her meticulous thrift, her careful management of every resource, all were perceived as odd, peculiar, even ungrateful. The freedom she had so desperately yearned for, the freedom she had imagined coming to America to find, was not just the freedom to choose, to consume, to relax. It was also, she now realized, the insidious freedom to forget, a luxury she simply did not possess. Her heart ached with the bitter knowledge that she was carrying a ghost they could not see, a shadow they did not understand, a history they could not bear to acknowledge. She was a silent witness to a forgetting she could not partake in. Helga grappled constantly, relentlessly, with a profound, gnawing survivor's guilt that permeated her every waking moment and invaded her dreams. The stark, almost obscene contrast between her comfortable, well-fed present in America and the harrowing, desperate suffering of her family and friends back home in Germany was a persistent, corrosive ache in her soul. She would often find herself meticulously preparing a lavish meal in the bright, abundant kitchen, her hands moving through the motions, only for her mind to flash vividly to her sister, struggling to find even a handful of flour, her children's faces gaunt, or to her mother whose face was perpetually etched with worry, her eyes always scanning for a solution to the never-ending question of where the next meager meal would come from. She wrote letters home, long, carefully worded missives, composing each sentence with agonizing precision, always omitting any details of her American life that might cause pain, or worse, stir envy. She spoke of her health, of Robert's kindness, of the weather, of her efforts to learn English but never of the towering refrigerator brimming with food, the endless supply of meat, the vibrant, unblemished fruits that were everyday staples here. She was afraid. Afraid of the bitterness it might sow in their hearts. Afraid of the impossible dreams it might ignite. Dreams that could never be fulfilled for those left behind, still struggling in the rubble. Even in her sleep, the past pursued her, relentless and unforgiving. She dreamt of bombs, the earth-shattering roar that vibrated through her very bones, the splintering wood, the cries of the wounded, the screams of the dying. She dreamt of hunger, a physical emptiness that clawed at her insides, a hollow ache that echoed the void within her soul. She saw the faces of the lost, friends and neighbors whose lives had been snuffed out by the war, their expressions frozen in memory, sometimes accusing, sometimes simply resigned. The ghosts of scarcity lingered, whispering to her from every full plate placed before her, from every warm room she entered, from every soft bed she lay upon. She wrestled fiercely with the ethical implications of her newfound abundance, with the very idea of deserving such ease. Was her comfort a betrayal of those who had not survived, of those who still suffered? How much of her past self, the resilient, frugal, battle-hardened Helga, must she shed, must she discard, to truly belong here, to be accepted into this new, effortless, almost childlike world? It was a moral dilemma that tore at her core, the relentless pull of assimilation, of becoming American, versus the desperate, urgent need to retain her identity, her history, the very essence of who she was, the high lessons she had learned. The overwhelming prosperity surrounding her felt like a betrayal of all those who had perished, all those who still struggled, all those whose lives remained steeped in deprivation. The sheer statistical disparity between the two worlds was a constant, almost unbearable pressure, a silent judgment she carried everywhere. Post-war Germany faced widespread food shortages, its once proud cities reduced to desolate, gaping rubble, millions displaced from their homes, and many teetering on the brink of starvation, their bodies frail, their spirits broken. Hyperinflation eroded what little savings people had, making even basic necessities unattainable, rendering money worthless. By stark contrast, the average American household was experiencing an unprecedented economic boom. Consumer goods, from gleaming cars to magnificent refrigerators, were rapidly becoming commonplace, not luxuries reserved for the elite. The economy was roaring, fueled by triumphant industrial production and a collective, almost giddy sense of victory and boundless possibility. This stark difference, a chasm of human experience so vast it was almost incomprehensible, fueled Helga's internal conflict and guilt, making her new life feel not just like a blessing, but an immense, suffocating burden, a heavy, ill-fitting cloak. She often found herself weighing the physical heft of a simple loaf of American bread in her hands, comparing it not to its dollar cost, which was meaningless to her, but to the invisible, immense weight of her memories, of what that same bread, or even a crust of it, would have meant in her former life. Every act of consumption, every moment of ease, every bite of food, was filtered through the precise, unforgiving lens of her past, a quiet, constant accounting that no one else understood, nor could they. The climax arrived not in a flash of violence or a dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet, overwhelming, almost suffocating setting of her first American Thanksgiving. The dining room, usually a place of pleasant if somewhat bewildering gatherings, now seemed to Helga a cavern of unbridled excess, a shrine to consumption. The table groaned under the immense weight of food, a massive golden-brown turkey, its skin glistening and burnished, its aroma filling the room. Countless side dishes, each one a testament to lavishness and culinary creativity, crowded every available space. Creamy mashed potatoes, sweet cranberry sauce, vibrant green beans, rich gravy, and fluffy stuffing. Pies, with their intricate crusts and sweet fillings, were piled high, their sugary scent mingling cloying in the already warm, heavy air. The family, a sprawling assembly of Robert's parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, were all present, their voices a boisterous symphony of laughter, easy conversation, and unburdened enjoyment, their faces alight with uncomplicated happiness. Helga, despite her very best efforts to join in, to offer a polite smile, to nod at appropriate moments, felt herself becoming utterly overwhelmed, her senses assaulted by the sheer volume, the rich aromas, the clamor of joy that felt alien, almost threatening to her. From Helga's perspective, the scene was almost grotesque, a garish painting of what she had come to distrust. The vast amounts of food, far more than anyone could reasonably eat in a single sitting, spoke not of generosity, but of a casual, almost thoughtless abundance, a complete disregard for scarcity. She watched, her stomach churning, as crumbs fell unheeded onto the pristine tablecloth, as half-eaten portions were carelessly pushed aside to make room for more, as children, spoiled and oblivious, left perfectly good food on their plates without a second thought. The sheer celebratory indulgence, the almost careless ease with which they consumed, screamed danger to a small, anxious, deeply ingrained part of her soul. Her hand instinctively reached, almost unconsciously, for a dropped piece of turkey, a habit honed by years of scavenging, of seeing value in every fallen crumb, but she quickly snatched it back. A flush of shame, hot and stinging, creeping up her neck and across her cheeks. She caught Robert's innocent, happy gaze across the table, his eyes full of warmth and love, and in that moment, a vast, unbridgeable gulf seemed to open between them. His joy was untainted, untouched by the shadows that still clung to her, by the constant vigil of memory. From Robert's angle, he was simply proud, proud of his family, proud of his American home, proud to finally have Helga here, safe and sound, in a place of peace, surrounded by love and plenty. He looked at her, so quiet, so beautiful in her new dress, her face serene, and hoped with all his heart that she was finally beginning to relax, to let go of the past, to embrace this vibrant, welcoming new life. He saw her subdued demeanor as shyness, perhaps a natural reserve for a newcomer, but certainly not the deep-seated trauma or profound moral conflict that was raging, unseen, within her. He caught her eye and offered a warm, encouraging smile, gesturing subtly towards the golden-brown turkey, urging her, without words, to eat more, to join in the bountiful feast, to partake fully in the celebration. He was trying to draw her out, to make her feel welcome, to integrate her, but in his efforts, in his very kindness, he was inadvertently pushing her further into discomfort, deeper into her own silent agony, exacerbating the very pain he wished to alleviate. Eleanor, Robert's mother, watched Helga with a mixture of concern and a growing, unacknowledged frustration that she tried hard to suppress. She had tried everything she could think of, cooking her favorite dishes, taking her shopping for new clothes, inviting her to church socials, introducing her to friends. She genuinely wanted Helga to be happy, to feel at home, to finally shed the burdens of her past. She noticed Helga's quietness, her almost haunted eyes that seemed to look through things rather than at them, and misinterpreted it as simple homesickness, or perhaps even a mild disdain for American customs, a stubborn refusal to let go. A pang of impatience, quickly suppressed, stirred within her. She wished Helga would just lighten up, accept her good fortune, and truly enjoy the peace and prosperity that had been denied to her for so long. She didn't understand that Helga's struggle was not against the comfort itself, but against the very nature of its effortless existence, its seeming innocence. Overwhelmed, not by anger, which would have been a simpler emotion, but by the sheer sensory input, by the crushing weight of her internal conflicts, by the unspoken judgment she felt from within herself, Helga suddenly, almost silently, pushed her chair back from the table. The scrape of wood on the polished floor was loud in her ears. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the joyous din, so soft it was almost lost. I need a moment. I must step away." She excused herself from the table, walking stiffly, her movements precise and contained, towards the quiet sanctuary of the hallway, away from the overwhelming warmth and noise. Robert, noticing the tremor in her voice, the sudden pallor of her face, the almost desperate look in her eyes, quickly followed her, a knot of worry tightening in his stomach. He found her standing by the coat rack, her shoulders shaking almost imperceptibly, her head bowed low as if trying to hide from the world. He reached out, his hand gentle, placing it lightly on her arm. "Helga, what is it? Are you all right? You seem troubled." She turned to him, her eyes wide, glistening with unshed tears, reflecting the dim hallway light. It was not anger that possessed her, not frustration, but a profound, almost shattering grief, a tidal wave of guilt and sorrow that had finally breached the dam. Her composure, so painstakingly maintained for months, finally broke. She didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't lash out. She simply crumbled, her body racked with deep, silent sobs, tears streaming down her face, unchecked, unashamed. "How can I eat so much?" she choked out, her voice raw, fractured, barely a whisper. "When they starve. When I know, truly know, that my sister is hungry, my mother is cold. How can I laugh, truly laugh from my heart, when I remember the screams, the endless hunger, the faces of those we lost, those who had no chance? This is too much, Robert. This freedom, this comfort, it feels like a cage built of guilt, of memories I cannot escape, memories that burn even brighter in this warmth." She buried her face in her hands, her body convulsing with the force of her pain. This was it, her decision, born of desperation, to finally vocalize the internal battle that had been silently consuming her, the raw, unfiltered truth of her struggle, a truth that had been gnawing at her soul since the moment she stepped off that train. Robert, utterly shocked by the raw, unfathomable depth of her pain, by the sheer anguish in her voice, truly began to understand for the first time. It wasn't simple homesickness, not a mere adjustment period. It was an open, festering wound, a trauma that pulsed beneath her calm exterior. He stood there for a long moment, the boisterous sounds of Thanksgiving, of family joy, fading into a distant, muted hum, a world away. Then he moved to her, wrapping his arms around her, holding her tightly as her body shook with the force of her sobs. He didn't try to offer empty platitudes, didn't try to tell her to cheer up or to forget the past. Recognizing the futility and cruelty of such words, he simply held her, letting her cry, letting her words, full of grief and guilt, wash over him, immersing him in her pain. In that long, silent embrace, a difficult, intensely honest conversation began to unfold, not just between them, but within Robert's own heart. He listened, truly listened, perhaps for the very first time, to the unvarnished truth of her past, to the profound, lingering agony of her present. He acknowledged her pain, validated her feelings, rather than trying to fix them or dismiss them as irrational, as mere melancholia. This conversation, born of her breaking point, of her utter vulnerability, was a profound turning point for them both, a moment when their two worlds finally, truly began to intersect. Helga didn't instantly transform into a carefree American wife. The scars of war and scarcity ran too deep for such an easy, facile erasure. The memories were etched too deeply into her soul to simply vanish. But the conversation with Robert, that moment of shared vulnerability and profound understanding, was a crucial first step, a silent, implicit permission to begin the slow, arduous, lifelong process of reconciling her two vastly different worlds. She started to find small, quiet, meaningful ways to bridge the chasm between her past and her present. She joined a local church group and began volunteering at their outreach program, helping to organize clothes and food drives for war-torn European countries, particularly focusing on Germany. This tangible action, this channeling of her survivor's guilt into concrete, helpful effort, brought her a profound, if quiet, sense of purpose. She found solace in gardening, meticulously tending to a small plot of land behind the house, cultivating vegetables and flowers from the rich American earth, with a reverence born of profound understanding and respect for life's fragile growth. It was a tangible connection to the earth, to growth, to sustenance carefully cultivated, rather than merely consuming what was effortlessly provided. Her resourcefulness, once a desperate necessity for survival, now became a quiet virtue, a unique contribution to her new home. She was still meticulous, still careful with every resource, but now it was less about fear of lack and more about a deep-seated respect for what she had, a quiet celebration of abundance rather than a fear of its disappearance. This habit, once seen as peculiar, slowly began to be understood by her new family, a testament to her unique history. Her children, when they came, grew up with a unique, perhaps even paradoxical blend of American optimism and German pragmatism, a worldview shaped by their mother's quiet strength. They heard her stories, told sparingly and with great care, not as tales of woe, but as profound lessons in resilience, in the importance of gratitude, and the enduring value of hard work. They learned not to take comfort for granted, not to waste, not to forget the value of a single mended sock, or the simple joy of a homegrown tomato. She instilled in them a quiet strength, a deep respect for both hardship and abundance, a nuanced understanding of the world. She helped found a local charity dedicated to sending aid directly to communities in Germany, ensuring that her old home, the place she had left behind, was not forgotten by the generosity of her new one. Years later, as an elderly woman, her hands still surprisingly nimble despite the passage of time and the arthritic stiffness of age, Helga would watch her grandchildren. They were so vibrant, so full of carefree joy, so utterly removed from the world she had known. They would casually leave lights on in empty rooms, discard half-eaten meals without a second thought, their lives brimming with an ease she could only marvel at. She would feel a familiar faint pang, a whisper of the old anxieties, a ghost of the past stirring within her. But now, it was tempered by a profound sense of peace, a quiet acceptance. Her life in America had been one of immense adaptation, of profound personal growth, of forging a new identity from the ashes of the old. Her home, this house that had once been a source of bewildering shock and profound, crushing guilt, had indeed become a sanctuary, a testament to her quiet resilience, and a testament to the slow, beautiful blending of two vastly different worlds within her own heart. She understood, with a wisdom born of long experience, that home was not merely a physical place, nor just a collection of material comforts, but a complex, multifaceted feeling forged through the crucible of profound experience. It was a space where the past and present could finally, tenderly coexist, not erasing one another, but enriching each other, making the tapestry of her life complete. She had not forgotten. She had simply learned to carry her history, not as a burden, but as a part of her enduring strength. The true measure of freedom isn't just what you gain, but how you learn to carry what you've left behind, how you integrate the shadows with the light. In a world of apparent plenty, how do we honor the ghosts of scarcity that linger within us, shaping who we are, influencing every choice, and ultimately defining who we choose to become? Hit that subscribe button if you want more untold stories of resilience and cultural clashes from history. Stories that make us rethink what home truly means and how we find it in ourselves. If Helga's journey resonated with you, if her quiet resilience sparked a thought about your own definition of home, please consider subscribing for more untold stories that challenge our perceptions of history. Give this video a like if you found her story impactful, and share your reflections in the comments below. How do you carry your past into your present?